Hello and welcome to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio programme from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Kate Laycock in Bonn. This week, the second of two programmes looking at the intersection of climate and politics. We'll be putting the EU's newly announced emissions reductions targets under the microscope, as well as looking at two separate lithium mining projects crucial for the EU's strategic independence goals.
We have a conflict between unresolved development dilemma in Serbia, whether we will provide protection for water, soil and air, or we will do everything we can to extract mineral resources that we have.
Those stories and more coming up on the programme. The sounds of indigenous protests outside the COP30 climate summit in Brazil's Amazon region there. Whatever the conclusion of the COP, and at the time of recording that still is not clear, these are likely to be for many some of the most enduring images, a sharp moral reminder of the urgency with which those at the sharp end of our planetary crisis clamour to be heard against the hum of vested interests, lobbying and politicking. Long seen as a climate leader, the EU has in recent months substantially weakened its own Green Deal. Just last Thursday, an alliance of centre-right and far-right groups pushed the European Parliament to agree to exempt more companies from green reporting rules. However, there was one headline which meant that EU leaders could hold their heads high in Brazil. The announcement that the bloc's environment ministers under the Council of the EU had agreed to a European Commission plan to reduce the EU's greenhouse gas emissions by 90% by 2040. However, as William Denslow reports, that headline comes with caveats.
The vision is clear: for the European Union to achieve climate neutrality by the middle of the century. Executive Director of the European Environment Agency, Lena Ila-Moneman, says bold action is urgently required.
While we have made significant progress in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution, the overall state of Europe's environment is not good. The impacts of climate change are accelerating, and environmental degradation continues, threatening Europe's health, prosperity, competitiveness and security.
On November 5th, the Council of the EU, which represents the governments of member states, agreed to amend European climate law to include a binding target: 90% greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2040, compared to 1990 levels. Here's Denmark's Minister for Climate, Energy and Utilities, Lars Ugard.
The target is in line with science. It's needed not only for showing our global leadership in climate, but it's also there to give guidance to industry.
The target is one pushed by the countries asking for the boldest action on climate change. Here's Spain's Environment Minister, Sara Hisen.
The target is 90%. So it's what we ask for. This is the target. Legally binding target.
But the plan for getting there remains contentious. In fact, member states only need to reduce emissions by 85% and purchase the remaining 5% through international carbon credits. Critics say it will allow nations to buy their way out of cutting emissions, but the European Commissioner for Climate, Wopke Hoekstra, says the process will be strictly monitored.
We will make sure, and that is a hugely important thing for all 27 member states, but by the way also for the credibility of the whole system, for those from whom we might be buying, this needs to be verified, it needs to be additional, it needs to have the gold standard in terms of impact.
Environmental organisations are also concerned about provisions which would allow for revisions to the target should energy prices or European competitiveness be felt to be too severely impacted. However, MEP for the European People's Party, Jürgen Vorborn, says it's about providing reassurances for businesses.
if we push them too hard and scare them in a way, and I've heard colleagues using that language, that we should scare them into following our very harsh laws, what will happen then is that they will say, okay, Europe doesn't seem to be the place to invest. We go elsewhere. And then we lose the jobs.
Some countries, however, are already stepping up their efforts to protect and expand Europe's natural carbon sinks. Denmark, for example, has pledged to plant 1 billion trees over the next 2 decades in a bid to convert 10% of its farmland into forests and natural habitats, an effort to breathe fresh impetus into the EU's green ambitions. In the meantime, the European machinery moves slowly on. Once the European Parliament has adopted its own position, the Council of the EU can enter into negotiations with a view to agreeing on the final text of the amendment to the European climate law. And the global temperatures, they continue to rise. William Denslow, DW, Brussels.
It's not just the trees, by the way. This week, Denmark announced a new domestic emissions reduction target, 82% by 2035, which puts it substantially ahead of the EU's target for that time period. And whilst we're talking about targets, let's take a quick look at the Critical Raw Materials Act. This is the EU's plan for strategic independence in lithium, rare earths and materials critical to the green transition. And it sets out the following target. By 2030, 10% of the EU's critical materials are to come from domestic extraction. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but given that estimates put the current total of domestic extraction at between 1 to 5%, it's generally regarded as being pretty ambitious. Now, of all critical materials at the moment, one of the most critical is surely lithium. Lithium is a key component of lithium-ion batteries, which power everything from grid-scale energy storage through electric vehicles to consumer electronics. In other words, it's a vital resource, and producing it domestically doesn't just make environmental sense, it's also crucial to reducing European strategic dependence on other countries, most notably, of course, China. Serbia's Jadar Valley holds Europe's largest lithium reserves, but as Guy Delaunay reports, accessing them in the face of local opposition is proving tricky, even for the international mining giant Rio Tinto.
Electric cars are quiet and clean compared to their counterparts with internal combustion engines, and ideal for a car-sharing service, which makes them even greener. But for power, they rely on the white stuff. That's the lithium that goes into electric vehicle batteries. And one of the world's biggest mining companies says it's identified a massive reserve of it in Serbia's Jadar Valley.
It's the largest, longest life, highest grade lithium deposit, and it also comes with boric acid.
Chad Blewett is the managing director for the mining giant Rio Tinto's Jadar project.
For Europe, where I think over 90% of the refined lithium comes from China, there's a Critical Raw Materials Act that was released last year, and it aims to reduce dependency above 65% from a critical raw material from a single source. So the Jadar project offers 2 critical raw materials on the EU's list, which is lithium carbonate. Everyone talks about that for batteries. And this project will be enough for 1 million electric vehicle batteries per annum, but also boric acid. For Europe, it reduces the dependency from China for lithium.
How problematic at the moment is it for Europe that it's relying on China for its more than 90% of its lithium supply?
The whole point of the Critical Raw Materials Act is supply chain diversification, strategic autonomy for Europe, and for both Serbia and Europe, with the green transition underway, moving away from fossil fuels for industry, for transport, it's really important to look at renewable energy, storing that renewable energy with lithium batteries.
But the discovery of Serbia's lithium reserves hasn't been greeted with universal delight. In fact, there have been massive protests against the Jadar project. The area is important for both agriculture and sources of drinking water, and environmentalists warn that lithium extraction could damage those equally important resources.
Government tried to hide information, government tried to push for legislation and strategic document without participation of the public.
Mirko Popovic is from the Renewables and Environmental Regulatory Institute, a Serbian campaign group.
We have a conflict between unresolved development dilemma in Serbia, whether we will provide protection for water, soil and air, or we will do everything we can to extract mineral resources that we have. And this dilemma is not resolved in a way that we have a public consensus. On the other hand, it is strange that the project is planned to be implemented on agricultural land.
The anti-lithium mining protests were so fierce that Serbia's government withdrew Rio Tinto's permits 3 years ago. But last year, the country's constitutional court reversed that decision. Within days, Serbia's president, Germany's chancellor and the European Commission signed an agreement on access to lithium from Jadar. And in June this year, Brussels designated Rio Tinto's plans a strategic project under the EU Critical Raw Materials Act. Serbia's energy and mining minister is Dubravka Đedović-Handanović.
We have also started the process of amending our law on mining. That would be in line with the new directive of the EU, but that will also protect interests of Serbia and Serbia's citizens when it comes to exploration of those materials. And this includes also the environmental and social standards that need to be applied. And by closely working with the EU, we believe that it is the best partner because, of course, of the high environmental standards that are applied when it comes to developing the mines in the EU.
Now, though, dissent of a different kind appears to have derailed Rio Tinto's plans. Anti-corruption protests have dominated the past year in Serbia. That's dampened enthusiasm among international investors, and the fractious mood has played a part in delaying the government's granting of an official green light to Rio Tinto. Last week, the company confirmed it had put the Jadar project into what it calls care and maintenance status. That means it's pausing active development of the site. Chad Blewett says the government's withdrawal of Rio Tinto's permits under pressure is the key factor.
Overnight, I think the signal that got sent to the investment community was, don't worry about laws, don't worry about the laws that have been around, don't worry about delivering the studies. A political decision was made, which was then overruled by the highest court in the land. But what signal does that send out to not just us as an investor, but other investors in Serbia?
There'll be little sympathy from the protesters, but it's ironic that the very resource that Europe needs for its green transition is so close at hand, and yet still, apparently, so far away. Guy Delaunay, DW, Belgrade.
If European lithium is not to come from Serbia, then where? We'll be finding out in just a minute here on Inside Europe. In the Barosso region in the north of Portugal, a Portuguese company called Savannah Resources plans to mine enough lithium over a 14-year period to cover 500,000 electronic vehicle batteries per year. But here too, local communities are resisting. They argue that the open-pit mines will damage the local environment and put a strain on water resources in a region recognised by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization as a globally important agriculture heritage system. We tasked our reporter, Ashish Sharma, with listening to both sides of the argument.
Oh my goodness, what terrible weather.
Yeah, it's a shame that you can be...
As luck would have it, my visit to Boticas fell on a day when the Portuguese authorities issued warnings of flooding, severe winds and storms. Lightning danced around and thunder bellowed in the skies as I met up with Adriana Alves, communications and project coordinator from Savannah Resources.
This area is not strange to mining and exploration and natural resources. It starts with other minerals, but lithium is also there.
The Barroso project is not yet at the mining stage and Savannah are still raising funds. The company say their research has revealed 4 areas in the region where open pit mines will be drilled by blasting rock. The plan is to open one pit at a time. Once it has started, the project will last for about 14 years. It has the support not only of major mining companies, but also the European Union. Earlier this year, the European Commission designated it as a strategic project under the Critical Raw Materials Act, part of the EU's effort to expand and secure domestic supply of the raw materials needed as it pivots away from carbon and to renewables in an attempt to become carbon neutral by 2050.
2024 was a big year for different reasons. One of those was that we announced our first partnership with this big mining company, global company, which is AMG. So AMG signed an offtake agreement with us. Half of our yearly product will be bought by them. This can increase in the following years, of course. We still have an ongoing conversations with a lot of institutions, with the EU, Portuguese financial institutions and organizations to understand what we can do in terms of course, financing because of the importance of our project.
One of the reasons mining hasn't begun yet is due to fierce opposition from locals who formed a group called the Union of the Population of Covos de Barroso. This is the village that will be directly affected by the mining. They're worried about the environmental impact, especially in the use of water and access to land. While some have sold land to Savannah to carry out surveys, there are many parcels of land known as baldeos, such as parks, forests and commons, managed by local communities who are paid by the Portuguese government to maintain them. As a result, this land can't be sold, only rented. Aida Fernandes is the president of the Baldeos of Covos de Barroso and a farmer in the village.
Well, the project is very near the village and the farmers and the livestock. But for me, the point more important than my activity is the persons. Some people born and still there. They have 60, 17 years. If this project starts, the people can't live there. So we have to defend the land, we have to defend the water, but we defend the life of the people.
How would you react to people who might say you're stopping progress?
The narrative change every year. The first thing they say to us is, you need to explore lithium to save the world. After is for the green transition. After is for the independence. Now is for the batteries. They just speak about business. Environment in the moment is not the point. If we don't have nature, if all the things go happen, the people suffering because don't have water, because in the end, the point is more batteries for cars. Just no one speaking reduced, just the big companies, they just think in business.
The issue of water has been one of the biggest concerns. Savannah originally planned to use the local river Covos, but say they've now changed that.
We do have ongoing interactions, of course, with the government, mainly because of environmental reasons. For example, we do have a body that manages the environmental permits, the environmental impact assessment, so we need to make sure we've done everything right.
Hello, I'm Diogo Sobral. I'm an activist helping this community. I'm part of the local association as well, and I'm doing a PhD in social anthropology about what's happening. They say that they're not going to use water from the river, but by their own numbers, they're going to need around 1 million liters a day. How are they going to collect this amount of water? I think this is one of the the dimensions of the project that is not properly explained. And we have been asking for independent studies and so forth.
They say don't go take the river. What is the river? The water of the river come from where? The springs, the small rivers, and this is that water they want to use. So they go kill the river, not one way, the other way.
So Marta, you've just thrown us all into a jeep, and can you explain where we're going now?
So, we are going to the beginning of the project area. First, we will pass some village, but they are far from the concession area. We are going to the place where, in the future,
We're now driving to one of the areas where the landscape will be affected when the mining starts. With me are Marta Freusch and Diogo Maier. They work in the community side of the Savannah project. Oh, it's windy, but it's not raining. Right, let's formally introduce ourselves.
Hello, my name is Diogo Maier. I'm the community manager for Savannah.
We are standing in an absolutely beautiful piece of countryside. I mean, they've got some wonderful pine trees in front, forest there, you've got the mountain view. Is all of this going to be destroyed by you guys?
No, of course not. There is, of course, worries about the impacts that the project will have on the local nature, on water mainly, and we take that very seriously. You will see that our project changed from 2021 to the 2023 to impact less the local resources. The local river covers will not be touched by us, and so we listened to the worries that the community had. We changed the project, and we'll listen always if we have the opportunity to talk with the local community, and we take those worries very seriously.
How are you then able to communicate that? Because it's not working so far.
Yeah, I think it's working a little more than it was working a couple of years ago. So we have various ways of established communication. Marta actually recorded a radio show where we answer to the community's questions.
Exactly, we are touching with the people all day. We are around in the village. We have friendly relations with the majority of the community members. We engage with them several times.
While Savannah is happy to discuss the project, activist Diogo Sobral says the conversation is one-sided, with no option to stop the mining.
Talking, so what does it mean? Because if the invitation to a negotiation happens in a space in which the no to the mine is not an option, then it's not a true conversation. It's almost a threat, right?
They come from outside. They need to show something. They need to show results. I just defend my land, my life, my community. I don't pretend to leave Kovas, so I can still there and fighting.
Savannah Resources do have the support of the Portuguese government. This means if they can't rent the land they need, they can request it from the government, who are the overall administrators. Once up and running, the Barossa mine is projected to be the largest and most significant domestic source of lithium within the EU, crucial for everything from electric vehicles through to energy storage for wind and solar. It's also a major test case for the viability of large-scale domestic production of strategic materials, and the biggest challenge to overcome are likely to be social, not technical. Ashish Sharma, DW Boticas, Northern Portugal.
There are a whole host of other environment stories over on our sister podcast, Living Planet. Their latest series is called The Switch, and it's looking at why the energy transition is proving so hard. Highly recommended. This is Inside Europe, and I'm Kate Laycock in Germany.
Hey, I'm Charlie Shield, co-host of Living Planet. And I don't know about you, but right now I'm really not sure what to think about the future. 1 minute, we hear this.
The planet experienced its hottest year ever in 2024 and at one point crossed a temperature.
And it feels, well, like we're cooked. But then we hear stuff like this.
Renewable energy has overtaken coal as the world's leading source of electricity for the first time.
And it seems like maybe, just maybe, we could be turning a corner. But fossil fuels still dominate, and the energy transition is proving anything but simple. In this new 3-part mini-series from Living Planet, we're going from the deserts of Morocco to the grids of Europe and then into legendary climate writer Bill McKibben's office to ask why this is all so hard. The Switch, a mini-series on Living Planet, starts November 21st.
Welcome back to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio programme from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Kate Laycock. Solar power. It is cheap, it's clean, it's local. In short, it makes sense from an economic perspective, from an environmental perspective, and increasingly from a security and strategic autonomy perspective too. Under the Renewable Energy Directive, the EU has a binding target of at least 42.5% renewables in the energy mix by 2030, and solar is a big part of that drive. But just how and where the solar rollout happens, that's important too. Currently, the southern Spanish region of Andalusia is embroiled in a struggle which is pitting the countryside's traditional olive farmers against mega solar park projects backed by major energy companies. Zoe Bass has been following these developments.
We want to defend the rural areas and make them a place where people can live, because at the end of the day, it's our lands, our olive trees, which they want to get rid of.
That was Rafael Alcalá, spokesperson for the Campiña Norte platform. This is a citizens' initiative set up to defend the rights of Andalusian olive farmers who are currently resisting a wave of large-scale solar park projects that threaten to uproot tens of thousands of olive trees, many of them centuries old. Nieves Garcia, who inherited a small olive plantation from her father, is one of those affected.
In July, I received a letter from the Andalusian regional government notifying me that my land had been declared property of public interest. I was perplexed because I didn't know what this meant and what significance it might have.
Now, under Spanish law, a declaration of public interest is a legal precondition for compulsory expropriation of land. And as Nieves soon found out, she was by no means the only olive farmer to have received such a letter. Solar companies offered these farmers between 1,000 and 2,700 euros per hectare in compensation. Back to Rafael of Campiña Norte.
Between 2020 and 2023, these projects were presented to the large landowners in the area by intermediary companies. These owners don't usually live in Lopera. They have no attachment to the land, often own many properties and see these olive groves as just another business. Therefore, with the offer of these leases, they see an easy way to obtain money. However, there are many small landowners who do depend on olive groves, but these owners typically have only a few hectares. Since negotiating with them is more cumbersome for the company, they use expropriation laws to force them to sign leases.
According to Campiña Norte, some 100,000 olive trees could be cut down in order to make way for the installation of multiple solar plants covering hundreds of hectares of land. Even if current legal challenges are successful, they tell me that an estimated 42,000 olive trees are still under threat. 5,000 trees have already been bulldozed away. However, Andalusia's regional government, the Junta de Andalucía, claims that the number of felled trees will be under 13,000. They did not respond to my request for comment. Energy company Greenland also refused my invitation to comment, but maintained that only 36,000 olive trees will be affected. The solar company also states that landowners freely decide on the use of their land. Greenland does not pressure or impose anything. Both the European Union and Spain's national government have set ambitious solar targets for the coming years. However, Natalia Corbalan from SOS Rural, a nationwide organisation advocating on behalf of rural Spain, says it is primarily local politicians that must take responsibility for pitting Spain's traditional olive farmers against large energy corporations like Greenland and FRV Arroyadas.
The autonomous communities make extensive use of European Union policies to absolve themselves of responsibility for the mistreatment of agriculture. This mistreatment isn't just national and European anymore. It's happening right here, at the hands of local politicians.
Public anger has been directed at the regional government of Andalusia, currently under the leadership of the conservative Partido Popular, which has enthusiastically green-lighted these projects. But at a municipal level, tensions are also emerging. I spoke with Francisco Sevilla, a United Left councillor who left a coalition with the Socialist Party in the small town of Lopera in Jaén.
A la semana de publicarse ya lo que es la zonificación.
A week after the zoning plan was published, it vanished, and nothing more has been heard about it since. Only recently they were going to protect the olive groves of Jaén as a UNESCO heritage site, and now it turns out that we're going to ruin them and install a photovoltaic plant. It's incomprehensible.
No lo vamos a destrozar para instalar una planta fotovoltaica, que es incomprensible.
The sense of confusion and mistrust in the countryside is benefiting far-right parties like Vox. This is Vox's representative in Jaén, Francisco José Alcaraz.
Me encuentro en Lopera, una pequeña población de Jaén.
I am in Lopera, a small town in Jaén, to denounce on behalf of Vox that 100,000 olive trees like this one are being uprooted to be replaced by solar panels. A disaster for a province like Jaén, a disaster stemming from policies like the Agenda 2030, the Green Pact, or the Nature Restoration Law, policies that all parties, all except Vox, vote for in the Andalusian regional government, in Madrid and in Europe.
Almost all of those to whom I spoke told me that they are not against solar power, but they are struggling to understand why renewable development must come at the expense of Andalusia's centuries-old olive trees. Not only do these absorb over 10 times more CO2 than less mature trees, they are also an integral part of the social and economic fabric of this region. Local councillor Francisco Sevilla again.
These solar plants don't generate any kind of employment. What they generate is job destruction. I've always said that if the olive groves fail, the village will fail.
For olive farmers like Nieves Garcia, the value of her lands and heritage are without price. And that includes the survival of small endangered species like this scrub robin.
It's not just economic. They're taking my olive trees. They're taking away part of my life and part of the natural environment, my land. It's a very significant loss.
This is Zoe Bass for DW in Andalusia.
The transition has to be just, but it also has to be quick because we're losing time. Scientists warn that we are hurtling towards crucial environmental tipping points, natural thresholds which, once crossed, can trigger large and often irreversible shifts in the systems that sustain us. One of those is the AMOC, a large system of ocean currents that moves warm water north and cold water south. You might have seen the film The Day After Tomorrow, where the Northern Hemisphere is suddenly plunged into snow and ice. Well, that was based on scientists' warnings about what an AMOC collapse could trigger, although admittedly the timeline was accelerated for plot purposes. So, what could trigger a collapse of the AMOC? Well, one key thing to watch are those melting glaciers in Greenland, because as they melt, they add large amounts of fresh water to the North Atlantic, reducing the density of surface waters and slowing the sinking that drives the currents. It's a phenomenon that's been concerning our partners over at GBH's The World, so much so that the world's host, Carolyn Beeler, undertook a reporting trip of her own.
We were on a 200-foot scientific research vessel sailing from the coast of southeast Greenland into Sermelake Fjord, essentially an inlet carved by glaciers and flanked by jagged mountains. There were about 15 scientists on board, and I hopped on when they started sailing into this fjord toward the Greenland ice sheet itself. All right, this is beautiful. Great. All right, so camera will be in this hand. When we got close to the end of the fjord, bright polar sun was bouncing off the iceberg surrounding us, and I was juggling a recorder and a camera to try to capture it all.
You can see the tall mountains on both sides, and these glacial fjords were carved during ice ages when the glaciers expanded.
Harvard oceanographer Fiamma Strano is the lead scientist on the ship and has been studying this fjord since 2008.
Even just melting a fraction of the ice sheet and putting all of the fresh water into the ocean quickly has the ability to really affect the ocean circulation.
Here's why. The AMOC is driven by warmer surface waters near the equator moving northward. Now, as they cool, they sink to the bottom of the ocean, are carried back toward the equator, and eventually rise again.
The AMOC, this overturning circulation, is very sensitive to fresh water. So if the ocean is salty, fresh water, it's very light, it sits at the top of the ocean, and it can inhibit or completely stop this process of mixing that is part of the overturning circulation.
This is seen as key to predicting the future of the AMOC, and it's what scientists are doing on this ship, measuring this meltwater to understand better where it is and where it's headed.
And there it goes.
PhD student Aurora Roth leans over a railing on the ship deck as she watches a large metal cage filled with water-collecting canisters get lowered into the fjord.
And the water's so clear that you can see it like 10 meters down.
Sensors on this instrument measure the temperature of the water and how salty it is at different depths.
And I kind of think about it as like spying on the ocean or eavesdropping on the ocean.
Now, this data and 18 years of data gathered by generations of Strano students show that meltwater from Greenland's glaciers is making its way out of this fjord and into the North Atlantic. To understand how it and other forces are affecting the AMOC, scientists have sunk sensors farther out in the ocean that record data 24/7. Some of these sensors, called moorings, stretch from the Bahamas to Western Africa. The ones Strano works on are deployed off southern Greenland, stretching to Canada in one direction and Scotland in the other.
We've been measuring the flow of warm water poleward and the return flow towards the equator, so southward, for over 10 years. And so what we can do is we can link the measurements here to the AMOC measurements.
As she and I talk, Strano and her team are recovering a mooring they deployed here 2 years ago.
5-3. 5-3-3-3-3-3-1-0. 1-1-0.
She stands at the edge of the deck in a hard hat and life vest, working with Harvard researcher Margaret Lindman to send at the mooring a signal to come to the surface.
Jakob, we are going to release the mooring.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, good luck.
So now we go up to the bridge to look for it. Scientists, the crew, everyone heads to an upper deck peering out to starboard to try to spot 3 buoys that will float the sensor to the surface.
Roger that. We spotted it. Yay! All right, Tunis, you get the chocolate. Good job.
Tunis, where is it?
Over there. The little ice. You can see.
In front of this little iceberg in front of it. The crew fishes the mooring out of the sea. The scientists scrub off 2 years of accumulated muck. And then 4 scientists and 1 reporter huddle around a computer to watch the data transfer.
1 minute to download 2 years worth of data.
It looks like a full record, which means 2 more years.
So it's a success.
Success.
Yay.
Success here means one more hard-fought data point to add to an 18-year record Stranio has been collecting about what Greenland's melting glaciers are doing to this fjord and what that might mean for the AMOC.
To understand this link, make predictions, give information that communities can use to adapt and prepare is really key. And at the same time, a reminder that we need to reduce fossil fuel emissions if we don't want our planet to absorb even more heat.
Carolyn Beeler is host of The World, a podcast and radio programme from GBH. And we love The World's reporting so much that we're actually going to bring you a double whammy this week, because a while ago, their reporter, Hannah Shunatri, produced a fascinating little piece about one of my absolute favourite cities in Europe, Bergen in Norway. Now, I have spent quite a bit of time in Bergen recently, but what I didn't know until I heard Hannah's report is that it is at the cutting edge of urban rain infrastructure, which it has to be, I guess, being one of the wettest cities in Europe and getting wetter by the year.
It takes a particular kind of person to live in Bergen. You have to really, really, really like the rain.
The rain or the weather influences the mornings, what to wear, what are you going to do in kindergarten or school, etc. How much clothes you need underneath the rain clothes.
Stina Ellefset Usalan is one of those people. She heads the climate team at the city's Urban Environment Agency. She says Bergen is known as one of the rainiest, if not the rainiest, city in Europe.
It might influence most when it's not raining. So when the sun comes out, you cannot stay inside.
On average, Bergen gets more than 200 days of rain each year. This amounts to roughly 8 feet of water. Stormwater systems move all that water out of the way. These are typically networks of drains and underground pipes that funnel the water out to the fjord. Climate change is bringing Bergen even more rain, and it's raining more intensely. And that is causing flooding because the pipes were not designed to hold that much water. Ingrid Vatne is an engineer at the city's water utility.
So we have private houses can have problems having the water coming up in their basements and also water coming from the mountains to the houses.
So Bergen, like many cities, is upgrading its infrastructure. But instead of building bigger pipes, Bergen is building rivers. Bergen's newest river runs just over half a mile along the light rail tracks. Vatne and her colleague, Trudy Hogan, brought me to one of the stops just outside the city center.
Yeah, we're in the what we call the Bergens Valley. It's sort of a valley leading down to the city of Bergen, which is situated on the sea. And it's surrounded by two...
The valley is framed by two large, steep mountains. That means lots of water rushes very quickly into this area. There used to be a natural river to catch it all. But Hogan says it was encased in a pipe and buried in the 1950s to make room for the city's development. So when the light rail was planned, they dug a new stream on top instead, leaving the old river running through the pipe below.
But the idea is that all the water from the roofs led down to this channel and not into the pipes.
Ingrid Vatne says this two-layer approach significantly increases the capacity of the system, catching more rain and slowing down the runoff.
We want to bring the water up into the surface where it belongs, and we need to give the water time and space, and that's the only way of doing it.
The new stream is also dotted with rain gardens to absorb even more water. The stream-rain garden combo is what's called a nature-based solution. The term refers to using nature as a method of buffering against climate extremes. In Bergen and throughout Norway, city planners and private developers are required to prioritize these systems for all construction projects. Sometimes that means creating new streams like the light rail project. City officials have also restored previously buried rivers and pulled networks of pipes up to the surface, removing the concrete. Stina Usalan says if this can't be done, the developer has to explain why and get extra permits.
It's sort of an idea of how to develop the city. We need to make use of nature-based solutions. We need to preserve, restore, establish, etc., nature so that we are better equipped to handle a changing climate.
The strategy emerged out of a 2-decade-long push for climate adaptation in the city. It was a response to an extreme rain event in 2005 that triggered a landslide, killing several people.
I think to many in Bergen, especially local authorities, regional authorities, it was kind of a wake-up call. This is something that can and will happen here as well.
Since then, Bergen has completed more than 50 projects incorporating nature-based infrastructure. Momentum is also increasing in other cities around the world, and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature has published standards for quality and credibility. But these projects also come with hurdles. Nature-based solutions often have a higher upfront cost to build. The flood systems usually need more land and require precise planning to make sure the water doesn't end up flowing into other homes, businesses, or streets. But for agency climate director Stina Usulan, the pros outweigh the cons.
We need to develop the city in a way that allows the water to flow, because it will flow. It will be here and it will increase.
Hannah Schunatri's report was first aired on GBH's The World as part of their Big Fix series looking at solutions to climate change. Find The World wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. You're listening to Inside Europe. And finally, time for something completely different. Venice has just hosted a killer of an event, Venice Noir, the first ever attempt to transform arguably the world's most romantic city into its creepiest, with a brand new festival dedicated to thrillers, mysteries, and all things noir. Hosted just behind Piazza San Marco, it definitely wasn't the November chill causing guests to shiver, as our fearless reporter, Danny Mitzman, armed only with a microphone, reports.
A creepy after-dark tour through narrow alleys into hidden corners. Hearing some of Venice's scariest stories, mysterious myths, and terrifying truths. Luckily, there'd be cocktails with the authors later to relax any hairs left standing on end. Venice Noir's main venue was the spectacular Ateneo Veneto, Venice's oldest active cultural institute, its elegant white facade overlooking La Fenice Opera House. Surrounded by sumptuous paintings decorating the walls and ceilings of the Great Hall, guests were treated to a programme of brilliant discussions to rival even the most established crime festivals.
Casanova was a sexual abuser rather than just
a mock trial of Giacomo Casanova, great romantic or sexual abuser. How noir can offer a way of interpreting the contemporary world. And writing about what you don't know, the challenge of setting books in foreign locations.
The challenge is when you're watching somebody else's.
The festival was devised by 3 acclaimed British writers who've all set their books here. Gregory Dowling, Philip Gwyn Jones and David Hewson, Venice Noir's international director.
It came about because the 3 of us, we were just in a bar thinking about, people kept asking us to do a book event, and we thought we'd hire the back room of the bar to do it. And then we realised there's a wonderful bookstore called Studium that sell all our books. So we said to them, could we do an event in the bookstore? And we did this first little event, hardly publicised it, but people were queuing out of the door to get in.
The seed was there, and 3 years on, the 3-day festivals attracted some of today's greatest Italian and English language crime writers. Tom Benjamin, Giancarlo De Cataldo, Erin Kelly, Carlo Lucarelli and Barbara Baraldi, to name just some of them.
About a year ago, when we were really just at the very, very beginning of this, it was very obvious to me that we needed a massive name. And my first thought immediately was Ian Rankin. So I sent off an email to Ian saying, would you like to come? We have no money, we can't pay you travel, I might be able to find you a hotel, and I can't give you exact dates. Ian came back in about 10 minutes and said it would be an honour, and it's been a real privilege to have him here.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you later. Well, I think Venice is an extraordinary city, and it lends itself to mystery and secrets and misty meetings and down dark alleyways. So it's perfect for crime writers. And it's a city with extraordinary history and quite a dark history as well. So it's a great setting, it's a beautiful city, and all the writers are having a fantastic time.
As are the audience. Have you come specially to Venice for this festival?
Yes, we have. We were at the Harrogate Crime Writing Festival, so this was the Venice version of that. And obviously, whilst we love Harrogate, Venice is significantly higher up our wish list. So it's good to be here.
I do tend to be attracted by anything that's got Venice in the title, but I thought it was a really fascinating idea, and because so many of my favourite crime writers were here.
Tom Benjamin, author of the Daniel Lester series set in Bologna, has just been on a panel about food in fiction called Dining Out on Crime. What are you looking forward to most?
I'm looking forward to the cocktails this evening, to be honest with you. Apparently there's a Venice Noir blood red cocktail.
I did the panel today on basically forms of murder, how murders are committed in the real world, in the fictional world, and how realistic they need to be in fiction. And I learnt a lot because we had a pathologist on the panel with us. So the writers were busy taking notes of things she was telling us that we can use in future books.
So we compare the level of blood sugar in the eyeball to in the blood, and if they're not the same, then that suggests that
Not just any pathologist either. Susie Lishman's the former president of the Royal College of Pathologists, and this is her third literary festival.
I always get asked the best questions at these because people have got such good imaginations and they've been thinking of really interesting ways to die. So people have often got something in their mind that they've often wondered, would that kill somebody? So I get really great questions about, freezing bodies and chopping heads off and slightly surreal things.
A frequent advisor to crime writers, Susie says she actually loves reading thrillers.
I particularly love crime novels set in Venice. It's a perfect place to set them, despite it being a remarkably safe place to be. It's so atmospheric. And I just love the combination of history, Venice, Italy, and then the story of the crime as well. So, perfect.
And what more perfect location for the grand finale than one very significant palazzo on the Grand Canal? David Hewson again.
Now we're in the Hotel Monaco. We're about to go into Casanova's old casino to wrap up a festival. We worked out there's been about 3,000 people come through the whole festival.
But a festival isn't a festival without an award, and Venice Noir's is a dagger crafted in Murano glass. Its winner, Inspector Rebus's creator, Sir Ian Rankin, says he'll be back.
This is the first year and the audiences have been fantastic and everybody's enjoyed themselves. So, festivals, it's tough financially to keep festivals going anywhere in the world. I would hope that Venice Noir will continue and will grow.
Tom Benjamin's convinced it will.
This is going to be one of the best kept secrets, or rather non-secrets, of the crime fiction festival circuit, I'm sure. This is really going to explode.
And David, Philip and Gregory are already plotting the next instalment. Danny Mitzman for DW in Venice.
Time for me to close off this crime scene. This programme was produced by Lara Kaberka and me, Kate Laycock. Our sound engineers were Gerd Georgi and Thomas Schmidt. Inside Europe comes to you from DW in Bonn.